Hey everybody, it's Alex here. Welcome to part one of behind the scenes editing my Premiere Pro footage. This video is meant to be the first part in a series or like a playlist that kind of breaks down my editing process step by step so that if you're new to Premiere Pro, it's not so daunting and overwhelming. So this first video is meant to just give you a look at the setup, how I organize my files, and what's going to set me up best down the road for editing. So if you're ready, let's jump in and take a look. So here we are, we're on my desktop, and I've already imported all of my files into a external drive that I use because I don't keep anything on this computer. I can't state enough how important it is that you get your files organized before starting to edit your footage. You should have a good file system going so that you don't have to move anything around, because if you edit all of your footage, you edit your video, and then you decide you want to move some files or rename something, it's gonna wreck everything. You're gonna have to go in and relink all of your file locations, and you're just not gonna like it very much. So that's why it's important to get a good file structure from the beginning and go with it. So right here I have we're gonna be editing the 3 basics for phone cameras video that I just shot. I have all the raw footage, and within that raw footage I have the camera, the face cam that I used, that was on me. And I have the audio that I captured separately. I have a overhead condenser mic that I use to capture my audio. And then I have B-roll. I shot that separately. So that's pictures I took that will go in the video. That's video that I took for just general B-roll, thumbnails, yada yada. Images I pulled from the web that I'm gonna put in there. That's all of my files that I want to be in the video. And then I also have a thumbnail folder for YouTube. So what I need to do now is create a working files folder. Working files. And that's a place where all of my Premiere files and proxies and things like that, that's where they're going to be contained. Because when I open a Premiere file and stick it in here, it's just going to generate previews, autosaves. It's going to make more folders. So in order to contain that, I'm going to put it in working files. So once we've got that, then we can open up Premiere and start importing our footage. Alright, so we're in Premiere, we're going to click New Project, and what did I name this? 3 basics for phone cameras. So 3 basics for phone cameras. And we can rename it something later. It just helps me keep track of it internally. And I want to browse because this is automatically going to default to the last location of the last file you're working on. So you don't want it in the wrong spot. So I'm going to go to my drive here, go to YouTube, 3 basics for phone cameras, working files, and then choose. You just leave it in there. Click OK. Alright, now we're in our editor, and I'm actually going to go up here to the editing tab. It just makes things a little easier, changes the layout. So we need to import some media. So this is where we go back and we go to our raw folder. And since the thumbnail doesn't get used in the video itself, all we need to do is drag and drop this raw folder, and then everything that we're going to use in the video gets imported. Oh, see in here I got an error that the RW2 files are not supported. That's fine because I shot some images in RAW for the thumbnail that I just left in the B-roll folder. So that would be these images that are the RAW photo image, not like a JPEG or PNG. So I don't even need those in the video anyway. So that's fine that they're not supported. So then you'll see that it kind of pulls over that file structure. So I have my original RAW folder, and within it I have my B-roll, my original camera, and then the audio. So the first thing we're going to do, since I shot this in 4K, we need to create some proxies. And proxies help you by making your footage more easier to work with. So if I drag these files over into my timeline, the computer is going to have a really hard time working with them and keeping it looking smooth and consistent. It would be really jumpy and laggy. And you can see that if you go to the camera videos, just this first one alone is almost over 4 gigabytes, second one's over 4 gigabytes, and then the third one's about a half a gigabyte. So those are some pretty big files to work with. So what you can do is render proxies. So if I select and then hold shift and click to the end, I now have them selected. I'll right click, go to proxy, create proxies, and we're going to, yours might be set to QuickTime. We're going to do H.264. And then we browse to a location and go back to my drive. go to YouTube, 3 basics for phone cameras. We'll go to that working files like before. And now we want to create a Proxies folder within here. So I'm going to click new folder, call it Proxies. And I'm even going to create another one since I have some B-roll footage that was shot in 4K that I'm also going to render. We're going to click new folder and label it cam. And we'll click and make another folder for B-roll, just so that we're one step ahead. So we go to our camera folder, select, and when you click OK, it's now going to open Adobe Media Encoder and then pre-render those files for you so that you have an easier time working with them. And here we are in Media Encoder. It's pulled them in and it's going to go through and edit and render a lower version of these images. Because what video editing does is this software, all it does is reference these files, these video files that you have. That's it. So it's referencing at what time code should we cut this, at what point should we overlay this with that. So you're not changing anything on these original video files. It's pulling the information from them. And that's why it's so critical that you don't want to change your file structure, because if you do, it's going to change the way the computer reads the information off of these files. So what we're doing with the proxies is we're creating lower resolution versions within this proxies folder. So it will no longer be a 4K version that we're looking at in this window and chopping up. It'll be more like a 1080 or a 720, a really low resolution image that will look crummy on our end. But when we get it all chopped up and worked with, we can just click a button and it will revert back to its older 4K file for export. So in a nutshell, that's what proxies do. And these are going to take a while to render. I might as well start the B-roll footage rendering also. So if I minimize my camera footage, I go to my B-roll, and if I scroll down, you can see the MP4. These are all 4K movies that I shot for my B-roll. So if I right-click, proxy, create proxies, settings stay the same, and I'm going to browse and put it in that B-roll folder that we created. So if I go to proxies, B-roll, select OK. Now it will create these jobs in Media Encoder. And now you can see we have our whole list of original camera files and all of our B-roll files ready for proxy. And this will take a while. Sometimes it could take overnight. It could take several hours depending on how much footage you have. For me, it's likely going to take an hour or two. So I'll leave this up and let it render in the background while I go work on some other stuff, not on my computer, because it's going to be really bogged down. And then when it's done, we'll jump back in and start our editing process. Okay, so this is all done. All of our proxies have been generated. It's been about exactly an hour since I started them. And I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned that if you're just filming in regular 1080p, you really don't need to do proxies. The quality is not really going to change a whole lot for you, and you're not going to see much of a difference in your editing process. But 4K or anything above, absolutely you want to do proxies. 1080, it's not necessary though. Okay, let's jump into the timeline. So what we want to start with is kind of the backbone or the spine of the video. So what we're going to do is grab my camera, my face camera video, click them, drag them. So now what you'll see is that it pulls it onto the timeline and we get this here. Quick tip before we dive into this, if there's something that you want to undo, if you make a change, you don't like it, you press Command Z on your keyboard and it will revert your change. So let's say I accidentally delete this clip. Oh no, it's gone. If I press Command Z or Control Z if you're on Windows, it will bring that clip back. Or let's say I deleted it, I brought it back and I go, maybe I did want it deleted. Command Shift Z will redo and delete that clip again. And then same thing, Control Shift Z on Windows, but Command Z, bring that back. We want to leave that in there. And I don't know if you're going to get sound out of this yet, but that's okay. We actually don't need sound quite just yet. So what you'll see is on the left side, there is a new item being generated, and that's our sequence. And I'm going to rename that and organize it so we can stay on top of our organization. So I'm going to rename this to raw. And you'll see why in a second. And I'm going to drag this out of that folder. And I'm going to create a new folder, or a new bin, it's called. Call it sequences. And I'm going to drag my raw timeline into my sequences. So there is my video with the audio as it came out of the camera. and those are linked together since they're in one file. That's raw as I shot it. We want to link my good audio with the video, and we just click and drag it over, and there it is. But now if you play it, it's not lined up correctly.
Good content, no matter what camera you're using.
So we got to fix that. I have a great application called Pluralize that lets me drop all of my different video angles and audio, and it syncs them automatically. But I'm going to pretend like you don't have that, because not everybody does. And what's nice is that Premiere Pro actually has this feature built in, and we actually have our own synchronization built right in. So what we want to do is take that first clip. Since these video clips are recorded back to back, the camera records multiple video clips as it's recording. So basically, as it's going, it'll stop and start and create a new clip. So these are all back to back, no gaps, no spaces in between. What we want to do is select these first two, right click, go to Synchronize, Audio Track, Channel 1, OK. And then what that's going to do is mathematically line up the waveform of the audio coming out of the camera and the audio that I recorded separately, and then it will match up. So you see it moved. Now it's in place and lined up, and we can bring these guys back over. I'm just going to click that white space and hit backspace or delete on my keyboard, and it brings them in. So now what we have is good sounding audio with our video, and we can actually mute this channel. That mutes all of the audio within here. That's the blue that's out of the camera. So now we should only hear this good green audio that I got out of my microphone. And if I hit play,
and that will greatly depend on
and you can see I messed up there, but that is what we want to sound like. Otherwise it would sound like this out of the camera.
Do I hold my phone like this or like this when I'm taking video and pictures?
Just sounds a little more tinny, like I'm far away. This is
the answer to that depends on what you want.
Much cleaner, much clearer. So that is how we arrange our audio. Now the second thing that we want to do before we get started here is color grade our footage. Because what happens is if we cut all of these up, we're going to have a bunch of tiny little clips spread out across the length of our video. And then what happens is if we want to color grade, we have to select each one and change the color individually. Instead, while it's all together in one big piece, we can just select a majority and color grade that way. So what we're going to do is go up to the color tab here at the top, let it load. It kind of changes the layout of Premiere, the options that it gives us. So we're going to select this first clip right here, and we can see that we're looking at the color, and it doesn't look too bad. I shoot with like a raw profile on my camera anyway, so for color correcting, this doesn't look too horrible as it came out of the camera. I'm going to adjust my exposure a little bit so that the brightness is up, turn up the contrast a bit. My shadows, I'm going to drop down ever so slightly. My blacks, I'm going to drop down just a little bit. Saturation is going to be up a little higher. Color temperature, I'm going to move it a little to the cooler side because we have that nice blue back there. I kind of want it to be a bluish picture. And then the tint, I'm going to move to green ever so slightly. My skin tone is just a little pinkish, and that's looking decent. So just those few little adjustments give us a good looking picture. And you can see the difference if we jump over to this frame over here. See how different that looked? Boosted colors, color corrected, it's a little brighter, and now it's a little darker and flatter here. So we want this to look the same as this. Now you can get really creative with this. All of these settings are just under your basic correction, and that's just exposure, contrast, whatnot. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Our basic correction has helped us out a little bit, boosted the colors, made it look not so flat and cloudy like that is. But we can take this a step further and apply a LUT or a lookup table. So if we minimize our basic correction here and go to our creative tab, we'll drop that down. We select this look button, and I really like to use this Cinespace LUT. It's like an orange and blue, and you can adjust the intensity here. You can see I can drag it all the way up, and that's looking crazy, disproportionate, and just not great at all. So if I apply that just a little bit, maybe around 20 or 30. It just gives me a deeper blue and a nicer contrast with my image. So now that's the final look. And if we go over here to the before, we went from that to that. And doesn't that just look all the more better? So now what we want to do is copy this look to our other clips. So we're going to right click on our clip, hit copy, and then select our new clips, right click, hit paste attributes. And the only thing we changed in here is our color. So you can paste like time, speed mapping, different volume effects. All we did is our color. So if we click OK, now if we go into our next clips, they have the same color profile. So that's an easy way to adjust our color. And then now as we edit and chop up, it's going to retain that color throughout. And then one final thing that we need to check before we start chopping this up is our audio. Again, the same principle applies. If we chop it up and realize we're too quiet, we now have to go through and turn up the audio for each little clip that we made. But while it's one long continuous clip, we can adjust it once and then it'll be good for the rest of our video process. So I like to expand this a little bit. We'll drag this up so we can see our waveform a little better, zoom in a bit. And now what I'm looking at and noticing is I only have a single channel on this audio. And that happens when I record off of my condenser mic just because of my setup. So I need to go in and fix this really quick. This likely will not pertain to you, so I'm just going to do it really quick. So now when adjusting your volume, a good rule of thumb is to keep it around -6 decibels. That's your voice or your talking, whatever it is you want to be heard. You want that to be like the highest point, your overall volume. And then any music that you have playing in the background, you want to typically be at a lower volume. So what I'm actually going to do to make sure that I get nice uniform audio throughout is I'm going to normalize my max peak. So I'm going to right click on my audio, go to audio gain, and click this button that says normalize max peak to -6. Click OK. Now what happens is it's going to shorten and make everything a little bit quieter so that the loudest point in all of this audio, the biggest spike, only hits -6, and then everything else will be below that accordingly. Since I recorded in a quiet room and in a relatively uniform voice, it shouldn't affect the quality of everything else. So if I hit play,
To that depends on what you want to do with those videos and pictures after you're done taking them. So
we can see that my audio is right up to the -6, and that's exactly where we want it. So that's perfect. And that's how we set up our base file for our video. We have our color graded picture, we have our graded audio, and now we're ready to create our next sequence to start editing. And to do that, go to Sequences, Raw. We're going to slide this window over just a little bit so we get our options back. Drag that raw over the new button. So now we have a new sequence, and what we have to do is rename this. So we're going to name this to 3 tips, and now it renames it there. And what it's actually doing is it's pulling a reference, so you can see it looks a little different. There's no separate channels or tracks or anything. It's just referencing all of the active clips in here. So in order to keep things simple and not confusing, we're just going to select that and delete it. So we have an empty sequence. We'll go back to raw, select all of our footage from here, Command C or Control C to copy, go back into here and paste it. So now these two sequences are the same. And the reason we duplicated it is because this 3 tips one is the one we're going to be chopping up and creating our video out of. But let's say something happens where we want to go back and use something else out of it, or we messed it up and we need to revert back to our original file. Now we have our raw folder that was untouched. Everything's graded correctly to be able to use, but it's not chopped up yet. So that's why we have an extra copy. And then one final thing that we're going to do is create another sequence, same thing as before. Click it over here, and we're going to name it B-roll. Select that, remove it, and then we're going to go to our raw B-roll, click the first one, scroll to the bottom, shift, click, drag everything over. These are all of our B-roll clips that we have. So now this will help us when we're going through later to be able to know what we have to fill into our video and how we want to decorate it. So that was a lot of info. Hopefully it wasn't too much to overwhelm you. And that's how you get set up to begin editing your video. In the next ones, we'll go over the next steps to chopping it up, putting together a cohesive story, and then decorating it with the B-roll later. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.